Welcome back to biology. We are talking about how our plants grow. So, as people, we grow to a certain size. We grow through your childhood, through your adolescence, and right around college age, you have kind of hit the limit of how tall you're going to get. That's called determinate growth. Some plants also act like that. Some plants also have determinate growth. Many plants have indeterminate growth, and that means the plant can grow through its entire life, not just its embryonic and juvenile periods, but its entire life. And it's able to continue growing because it has cells called meristems. It has shoot meristems above ground and root meristems below ground. Meristems are a type of stem cell that are able to keep dividing. They're undifferentiated, and they can just keep producing new cells. There are two types of growth that you'll see in a plant. Primary growth lets things get longer, and secondary growth lets them get thicker. Primary growth occurs at apical meristems. So this shoot apical meristem will let the plant get taller, and root apical meristems will let the roots go down deeper. And then lateral meristems are in the vascular cambium and in the cork cambium that let the plant get thicker. The cells of the apical and lateral meristems divide frequently during the growing season. In primary cell growth, that apical meristem cells will divide several times, and then they start dividing several times, and then they will grow larger and eventually differentiate into their mature cells. It can produce the protoderm, which will give rise to dermal tissues, the ground meristem, which will give rise to ground tissue, and the procambium, which will give rise to vascular tissue. Okay, those are three things to know: the protoderm, ground meristem, and procambium. Lateral meristems in woody plants also have a meristem, and that gives rise to all of the secondary growth. The apical meristems in a shoot tip or in a root tip are undifferentiated. That means they haven't been specified to be one type of cell, and as such, when they reproduce, the cells that they produce can then differentiate into whatever type of cell they are. When they divide, some daughter cells will stay in the apical meristem to make sure that there's always some undifferentiated cells here to allow the plant to continue growing. But some cells will start to get differentiated as primary meristem cells. And then after they grow, they become fully differentiated into mature plant tissues. Secondary growth occurs through the vascular cambium, the innermost ring, the cork cambium, the outermost ring. The cylinders of cells are 1 cell thick, and the dividing cells can remain in the cambium and grow to increase the circumference of the cambium. And sometimes one daughter cell will become a xylem cell or a phloem cell. Sometimes one daughter cell from the cork cambium will become a cork cell outside of the cambium. And when lateral meristems divide, primary growth stops in that area, and the stems and root thickens from the secondary xylem and phloem. A nice little, take your time and make sure you're going through everything in this image. In herbaceous plants, this would be herbs, flowers, plants that aren't woody, almost all of their growth is primary growth. You don't see them get very thick. In woody plants, primary growth occurs in the young parts of the plant, and then lateral growth, secondary growth, happens in the older parts of the plant. Flowering plants also can be categorized based on the length of their life cycle: annuals, biennials, or perennials. Annuals, which grow for 1 season, biennials for 2, and perennials, which keep coming back year after year. On a twig, the dormant apical bud is at the tip of the shoot. In the spring, this bud is going to drop its scales and start producing new growth. So you have a new cycle of primary growth, and this will produce a new node and a new internode. On each segment of growth, you'll have a scar to mark the presence of old nodes. And above the scars, there will be axillary buds or branches. The bud scars show you where the previous year's growth were, and every growing season will give you both primary and secondary growth.
Primary and secondary growth. A tree reaches its imposing size by combining primary and secondary growth. Let's review the two kinds of growth. Here you see the tip of a tree with the taper of the stem exaggerated for clarity. First, let's watch the tree grow, and then analyze the growth regions. Notice that some parts of a tree undergo primary growth at the same time that other parts undergo secondary growth. If the roots were visible, you would see the same thing in the roots. Primary growth occurs in young leaves and elongating parts of the stems and roots. Apical meristems, or regions of rapid cell division, provide cells for primary growth. Secondary growth occurs in regions of stems or roots that have completed their elongation. Leaves rarely have secondary growth. Secondary growth doesn't occur in many short-lived eudicots in most monocots, such as palms and grasses. Secondary growth occurs when a lateral meristem, called a vascular cambium, adds xylem and phloem to the stem. This picture shows a segment of a tree trunk with the inner tissue zones raised for visibility. The vascular cambium forms secondary phloem toward the stem's surface and secondary xylem, that is wood, toward the stem's center. That's the main reason why tree trunks thicken with age. Secondary growth also adds cork that protects and waterproofs stems and roots. Cork is made by one or more lateral meristems called cork cambiums, which occur outside the secondary phloem. Cork cambiums work at the same time as the vascular cambium, though we don't show that here. Besides making cork, cork cambiums often make extra storage tissue toward the inside of the stem, though we don't show that here either. The vascular cambium makes xylem and phloem by dividing its cells repeatedly, with outward cells becoming phloem and inward cells becoming xylem. Why doesn't this dual operation consume the cambium? To maintain itself, the vascular cambium alternates between making xylem and phloem. After each cell division, one cell stays meristematic, while the other differentiates, acquiring the features of a xylem or phloem cell. More divisions produce xylem than phloem. That's part of the reason why wood, or the secondary xylem, becomes much thicker than bark, which contains secondary phloem and cork.
Okay, so let's talk about how our roots are growing. At the tip of your root, this is your root coming down the soil, here is the root cap. And that root cap covers the tip. That protects the root apical meristem right here as the root is pushing through the soil, so you're not damaging those stem cells. And the growth is going to happen here behind the root cap. There will be 3 zones where there will be cell division. The zone of cell division is where the stem cells of the apical meristem and their immediate products are growing. Then the zone of elongation, just behind the apical meristem, where the cells are actually growing in size. And this will have 3 primary meristems, the protoderm, the ground meristem, and the procambium. And then the zone of differentiation, where the cells are maturing and completely differentiating into their specific plant tissues. The protoderm is the outermost primary meristem that will give rise to the epidermis. It's a single layer of cuticle-free cells and covers the surface of the root. One feature of them is root hairs, which make up 70 to 90% of the root surface area. And root hairs also increase the surface area so the root can absorb water and minerals. Ground meristems are stem cells to produce ground tissue. They mostly make parenchyma cells, and they make up the region between the vascular tissue and the epidermis called the cortex. Then the innermost layer of the cortex is the endodermis, and it will control what is coming in and out of the vascular cylinder and what gets from the soil to the vascular cylinder. The procambium is the innermost primary meristem that gives rise to the central vascular cylinder, and it has a solid core of xylem and phloem surrounded by the cell layer called the pericycle. They're all marked in this image here, or in this one. In most dicots, the pericycle forms a star shape, and the xylem is in the middle and the phloem as the arms of the star. And in many monocots, the vascular tissue is just a core of undifferentiated parenchyma cells, and the xylem and phloem will be scattered throughout it.
Root cross sections. The outer layer of a eudicot root is called the epidermis. To the inside of the epidermis is the ground tissue called the cortex. In most eudicots, the vascular tissue forms a solid vascular cylinder in the center of the root. The vascular cylinder consists of a lobed core of xylem with phloem between the lobes of xylem. The innermost layer of ground tissue, known as the endodermis, regulates passage of substances into the vascular cylinder. The outer layer of a monocot root is called the epidermis. As in eudicots, to the inside of the epidermis is the ground tissue called the cortex. However, the structure of the vascular cylinder in many monocot species differs from most eudicots. At the center is a core of parenchyma cells surrounded by alternating rings of xylem and phloem. As in eudicots, the innermost layer of ground tissue, known as the endodermis, regulates passage of substances into the vascular tissue.
Sorry, my thing is not moving. Okay. Lateral roots, their growth is also considered primary growth, and it mainly occurs when areas of the root are active, and the emerging lateral root just pushes straight through that tissue to get to wherever those nutrients or water-rich regions are. Lateral roots come out of the pericycle, which is the outer layer of the vascular cylinder found inside the endodermis. Okay, we will pick up talking about our leaves and stems growing in our final video of today. I will see you soon. Bye.